Hello everyone, my name is Emily Vallely and today I'm going to be answering some of your vintage related questions. As most of you already know, I'm an antique dealer and I have a booth at a local antique mall called Magnolia and Willow. And on Instagram and here on YouTube, you guys ask me lots of questions about buying and selling vintage and also about decorating using vintage items. So I wanted to do a Q&A answering all of the questions you guys have. I'm going to start by answering some of the questions you guys asked on Instagram. If you don't already follow me, my username is @EmilyVallely, and I post vintage content pretty much daily. Also, if you're interested in seeing the stuff I sell, I suggest following my other Instagram account. It's Make Do and Mend Vintage. Mac Cumpian asked, how do I not keep everything I buy? So I'm assuming that this person is an antique dealer, otherwise I don't know why they would buy something if they didn't have the intention of keeping it. In my experience, it has gotten so much easier throughout the years since I've started selling to not be attached to material objects. I feel like when I first started selling vintage, I wanted to keep everything I bought, and I wasn't materialistic, but I do love vintage so much, so there's just something about certain items that I feel a huge attachment to. And as I have developed my style and as I have sold in my space, I feel like that attachment has changed, and now I only gravitate towards items that are truly special, and I kind of have a feeling for that now of what I want to keep and what I can live without. And also, it's just good to think that it is a business, and if you sell that object you want to keep, you will make money. And I've just started to value traveling, going out to dinner. There's just more to life than material things, and I would rather have money for experiences or to just have money in my savings account. The same person also asked, how did you get started with a booth? Did you sell before you had a space? No, I did not sell before I had a space. I got started with my booth because one of my best friends is the owner of Magnolia and Willow. Her name is Emily Yep. And just becoming friends with her and going to estate sales with her, I started to realize that selling was something I wanted to do because I felt so passionate about buying vintage stuff, and I was getting to a point where I didn't want to keep everything I bought, but I just love going thrifting. I love going to estate sales, flea markets, all of that. So I wanted to have a purpose and a reason for doing it, and having a booth seemed like the perfect opportunity. The booth is not just mine, it's also my mom's, and at the time that we started thinking about having one, she was really looking for a job or just something else to focus on because she had spent her whole life raising me and my sister Lucy, and Lucy had gotten to a point where she was a bit older, so my mom had more free time and we wanted something that we could do together and a way to make money, and it was just a really perfect fit. So I got about 5 questions asking how I hang things on my walls, and also how do I hang so much being a renter. So my viewpoint on the renter aspect of it is that when you move out, the property manager is 100% going to be painting the walls. That is just a very common thing, that when you leave, they paint, they do a full clean out. So no matter what, they are going to be painting. If you think your landlord is going to have an issue with all of the holes in the walls, maybe it would be best for you to patch it and paint it yourself before they even come in and see what you did. But for example, my landlord is one of my best friends, so I got super lucky that it doesn't matter in my scenario, and they're totally fine with me making a lot of changes as far as fixtures and things on the walls and painting and stuff like that. But my parents have also rented 2 homes, and neither of their property managers have had a problem with painting when they left. And worst case scenario, you probably put down a security deposit and some money will be taken out of your security deposit for covering all of the holes and stuff. If you're renting month to month, I probably wouldn't suggest putting holes in the wall, but if you know you're gonna be somewhere for at least a year, I think it's safe to say that you should make the place your own and feel comfortable and do what you need to do when you're gonna leave to fix it and make the situation good. I would rather ask for forgiveness than permission. But you guys were also asking how I hung things, and most of the time it's just with a nail and a hammer. It's very basic. I don't do anything that weird or out of the ordinary, but if you're hanging pennants or something like the pie tins in my kitchen, For those types of things, I use 3M strips, but I like to use the Velcro ones because I feel like they're a lot stronger and hold up a lot longer. If you are hanging something that's really heavy, I suggest using an anchor, or there's also those nails with the hooks that are able to hold a lot of weight, and it says on the package how much weight it can hold. So if you're hanging something heavy, I would definitely make sure whatever you're using is secure. Linda Beck asked, do you clean/care for your vintage clothes in a special way? So the way I care for my vintage clothes is that I pretty much never ever wash them. My best friend is my Tide stick. I always have one in my purse, and if I stain something, I use that right away and I'll spot treat it. And if something really needs to be washed, if it's stained bad enough or for whatever reason you feel the need to wash it, I would run it on a delicate cycle. But I truly don't have too many vintage pieces that are that delicate that can't be put in a washing machine. But for the rare things that are that delicate, I would suggest using OxiClean or just getting it dry cleaned. Also, I just tend to be really gentle with my things. I've been that way since I was young. My toys from when I'm little are all pristine, and I never ruined anything or made a mess out of anything. So that's just a personality trait of mine. I am very careful with my things, and I store them well, and I take really good care of them. Another question from Mac Cumpian. She asked, do you feel like your vintage style has evolved? Yes, I definitely do feel like my style has evolved a lot, especially in the last couple years since I've become an antique dealer. I feel like now I become more inspired by a single object rather than a time period. So for example, a necklace can inspire an entire few months of how I dress. And I wasn't that way before. I used to be more like I would watch a movie and then I would become inspired by how they dressed on that and I would try to recreate it. I don't really try to recreate looks anymore. I prefer to mix things in with more modern things and not look like a time capsule. There's nothing wrong with dressing that way, and I really do appreciate people who do. I think it's so cool, and I wish I had the guts to do that, honestly. But I feel more comfortable when I'm wearing a mix of modern pieces, and I feel like I can make it more my style, because otherwise you're just copying a style that already existed. And I feel like when you mix a bunch of different eras and modern pieces, you can create something that's uniquely you. And that's more where my style has leaned in the last couple years. Mandy Williams asked, what are your recommendations for vintage home decor in a small space? I kind of answered this in my last video, and my recommendation was to watch my old vintage room tour from when I lived with my parents, which I will link down below. But to dive in more to that question, I suggest having a bunch of shelving, because shelving is the easiest way to display a bunch of small things and all of your favorite items. Otherwise, if you don't have a shelf, it's kind of hard to display anything. So you can have wall shelves, a hutch, a bookshelf, pretty much any type of shelf. Also, I think just having fun with any surface that you have in your room, whether it be a dresser top or a vanity or a nightstand. I think there's so many ways that you can make those spaces uniquely you and fill them with things you love. I think the best way to display vintage items on countertops without making them look cluttered is by using vintage trays, and then you can kind of have a little theme going on rather than just a bunch of stuff all lined up. You can have them grouped together more. And my biggest tip is to utilize your wall space by hanging all the art that you want. I think when you have a small space, it's really fun to just clutter the walls, and a lot of people don't like the way that looks, but I love it. I love a great gallery wall, and I think you can have so much fun with that. Also, if you have a room where you can hang a really cool vintage lighting fixture or chandelier, I suggest doing that because it can add so much character and personality to a room. Susanna Cole King asked, at what age did you develop an interest in interior design and or what inspired your interest in it? She also asked, do you think it's more inherent just in your blood or influence from growing up? To be honest, my interest in interior design didn't really start until I was about 21 years old, which is kind of late, I think, because now it is like my biggest passion and I can't imagine not caring about it. But before then, I definitely cared about what my space looked like, and I was constantly rearranging my room, and you know, I was interested in it, but I was more interested in the organizing, and I still am. I am very into organizing and keeping my space really clean, but that was my focus, not so much what it looked like. Although my room was always cute, so maybe it was something I subconsciously always was interested in, but just didn't realize it. But when I turned 21, me and my family, we moved into a new home. And it was at that time where I felt like I had this fresh start on life, and it was right before I graduated college, and I just had this new room that felt like a blank canvas, which is the room that's in my room tour that I mentioned earlier. And I just wanted to have fun with it, and I was really inspired by a lot of different movies and TV shows at the time. I had just watched Pretty in Pink for the first time, and I fell in love with Andy's room, and I really wanted to recreate some of the elements of her room in my room. So that's where some of the inspiration came for that. But I think it was the first time that I just had the freedom to do whatever I wanted with my room, whereas before my parents kind of put restrictions on what I could do because my room was painted and this room was just white, and we could patch holes if something got messed up or if I wanted to change something. So I just felt a freedom that I had never had growing up. As for the second part of that question, I do think it's kind of in my blood. I think that there's some parts of decorating that are kind of natural to me. Most of you guys probably don't know, but this last spring I took 2 interior design courses, and a lot of what I learned, I felt like I already knew, or like subconsciously knew, and I was already doing those things when I was decorating. So I do feel like there's a certain part that you are just born with, but there's also so much to learn. I definitely don't know everything, and I don't really want to, because I feel like that kind of takes the fun and the personality out of it. But I do think knowing the elements and principles of design are a really good starting point if you are interested in getting into any field of art. But especially for fashion and decorating, I think that those are really good to know, and it does make you question the things you're doing and why you're doing them. And you don't have to follow those rules all the time, but at least you know what rules you're breaking, and maybe you can have a reason for it or an understanding for why you're doing what you're doing. I'm sorry if I totally rambled on that last answer, but basically I do think there is a certain level of creativity you can be born with, but it doesn't stop there. You have to learn, you have to absorb information, you have to make mistakes and see what doesn't look good or what does. And I feel like you're never done growing, and there's always so much more to learn. Vintage Revival Art Company asked, what is your vintage unicorn, the one vintage item you want to own? So there used to be 2 vintage items that I was on the hunt for a really long time. The first one is the chair I'm sitting in. It is a vintage peacock chair, and I actually slept in a car to get this chair. I went to an estate sale. I was first in line, and it is mine, and I do not regret it. And the second item is this pink daisy Pyrex. I had wanted this piece of Pyrex ever since I watched the first episode of The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, because she has it and I just think she's so adorable. And I really like pink Pyrex, but the gooseberry print isn't my favorite of Pyrex prints, but when I saw this one with the flowers on it, I just knew I had to own it someday. Now I think something I am always on the hunt for but have not found one in my price range is a poodle trash can. I really want one for my bathroom, and they're so cute, but they're usually $100 or more, which obviously I'm not gonna spend that much on a trash can. So hopefully I'll get lucky at an estate sale one day and find one that I can afford. Leah Lou asked, where do you buy your items and how do you incorporate different decades together? I buy most of my items from estate sales, thrift stores, flea markets, but most of what I own is from the shop that I have my booth at, Magnolia and Willow, and also there's a shop in Long Beach called Vintage Emporium that I also really love. Besides that, I just acquire a lot of stuff while traveling, and anytime I'm in a new city, I always look up what the best vintage stores are, and I try to go see a lot of new places. As for incorporating decades, I don't really think too much about it, honestly. I more so go based on color or how a piece feels, and I mix things together based on how they look together and not if one decade is different than the other. I don't really think that matters at all. I think as you continue to decorate, you'll kind of get a feel for what you like, and you'll just piece things together that you really enjoy rather than what fits in a certain decade. Leah also asked, for someone starting their vintage journey, what is one item from each category that I'd recommend? I always find so many great upholstered chairs in thrift stores and antique stores, and I think that that is a really great way to add personality to a room and also have something super comfortable, because there are a lot of vintage pieces that aren't that comfortable to sit in, but typically upholstered chairs are very comfortable and they look great in a room. For kitchenware, I suggest Pyrex because it's basically indestructible. You can get a really great baking dish or mixing bowls, and you'll probably have them the rest of your life. There's honestly so much from every category that I could go into: books, vinyl, art, of course. There's so much, but I think going for items that speak to you, whether they're useful or serve a purpose or not, is the way to go and the way to start getting into vintage. And for vintage clothing and accessories, I think that coats are the #1 vintage item every person should have. Even if you have no other vintage in your closet, a really great vintage coat will last you forever, and they're made so much better than modern day coats. Also, you can never go wrong with vintage jewelry, especially when it comes to silver and gold. I feel like you can find really high quality pieces that are so much cheaper than new silver and gold. I have a lot of vintage diamond pieces where if I had bought it new, they'd probably be really expensive, but because they were vintage, I got such a great deal on them, and they're so much more unique than anything else I could find. All right, that is it for this video. If you want me to do another one of these and ask me some more questions, please feel free to ask your questions down in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel.